One of the things I've been doing is messing around with the SU carb needles. So the needle I've got in the carburetor at the moment is a number 3, and Ian suggested to me trying a number 5, which is a slightly richer needle, and I'm hoping that'll solve the sort of hole I've got in the throttle response. I could order new needles from the SU people, that's no problem. They do charge a ridiculous amount for shipping. So I think one needle would cost me something like £25 shipping or something ridiculous. So instead I went through my pile of old SU carbs and pulled out all the old needles, cleaned them up, and found that I had another number 3. And so what I've tried is using the instructions in this book, this Des Hamel book. I've adjusted the needle following the instructions here, and basically what you do is, the way SU needles work is they have what's called stations. So the needle is a tapered piece of brass, and every 1/8 of an inch along the needle is called a station, and it's a different diameter. And every needle has a different profile. So if you want to make a needle richer, you make it a smaller diameter, which means at a given position more fuel can get past it, so the engine runs richer. So it's not too bad to reduce the size of a needle using the techniques that they mention in this book. What I did is I've set it up in the lathe. I've got the needle there, and the stations are, as I say, 1/8 of an inch apart. So you can either use a little piece of card, or I actually have this handy little steel rule that's already got the right markings on it, 1/8 of an inch markings. And I was able to mark those on the needle there, spin it up in the lathe that's running at 350 RPM, and then using a small piece of wet and dry paper, you find the right station and you just squeeze the paper just at that point, just for a few seconds, and that will reduce the diameter. I've been measuring it here with the calipers. There are more accurate ways of doing this, but I found this worked pretty well, and it's close enough. There was my chart showing what the old dimensions were and what the new ones need to be. And so basically you just go along and you start at the fat end, because you're making it thin all the way along, and reduce it down. And then when it's close, you just use some 600 grit, which is very fine, and use that just to polish the needle finely without taking too much off it. And it turned out that wasn't too hard to do. The measurements are probably not 100% accurate, but they should be close enough. So this needle now is definitely reduced down. So this has turned a number 3 needle into a number 5. I'll put that in the car and see if it runs any better. So the new needle's in there. I made sure after I fitted it that's still centered. You can hear it closes with a thunk noise, which means that the needle's not rubbing on the jet, hopefully. It's definitely made it better, but it's still not quite right. I'm still fiddling with the tuning. But one thing is the new exhaust is working well. The fishtail comes out the back there. I actually made a mistake on that, which is the holes are only meant to be on one side, but I don't think that really matters. It seems to work reasonably well. The rubber mountings are also working well, and it's taken all the resonance and vibration out of the body, which is quite good. So the engine's actually warmed up now. I can run it. Austin 7 engines start really easily. So if we turn it on, this is the little starter pull here. You can see just one quick pull and they start. It'll start on the handle easily as well. So it's not too loud, but I still have a bit of hesitation. So still need to play a bit with the tuning. That needle is definitely better though. So going richer does seem to be the answer. It also tends to work a little bit better when the choke's out. And I may not have run it long enough to get it really up to temperature actually, so probably takes a little while to warm up, especially now the evenings are getting colder. But it's getting better. Oh, the other thing I should add, which is pretty obvious here, is I've been playing around with the front guards here and how I'm going to do the valancing in between the guard and the body. This is just my mock-up from cardboard. But you can sort of see how that's going to fill in the gap there. It'll be joined further down the guard, of course. And the other modification I've made is I've trimmed the back here. After talking to Joss mentioned to me that for this to be correct, the rear guard needs to be fatter than the back of the front guard. So I've actually trimmed this down so it follows that line, and I've trimmed along here where it's going to touch against the body. It's all just sitting on axle stands at the moment, so it's not at the right height, well, not the exact heights. What I'll do is I will make a piece that goes inside there, across the flat there, and up along the side here. I'll weld that together, and then the front guard gets bolted to the rear guard through that piece underneath here. So that's coming together quite well. I also realized I made these little stands for setting up the guards on top of the tires. They're sort of cut so that they sit on the tire nicely. And I'd forgotten I'd actually made two heights, and the ones I had before when I was mocking things up were an inch too high. I kept wondering why it didn't look right. So these are now the correct ones, which has the arch correct over the tire, and I've now got the spacing of the front of the guard and the front of the tire more or less correct. So that's coming along. One worth mentioning, if you are playing around with these needles a lot, then the little SU Carburetor needle book is really handy because it shows you all the measurements for all the different needles. And another really useful resource is this Minty Lamb site, which actually lets you graph the different needles and compare them. So you can see this is set up for a number 3, which is what I had in the car before. And if we change this to a number 5, you can see the new trace there showing how that needle is leaner across the range. I think most of these needles are set up so that the first couple of stations, which is where the car idles, are very similar, if not exactly the same, and then it only seems to diverge a bit later on as you get further down the needle. But this is very handy to see exactly what it is that's different between various needles. And the other thing that's really useful is a illuminated magnifier, so you can actually read what's stamped on the end of the needle to see what sort of needle you've got.